our ears, part of that filtering helps us to hear from what's behind us because our ears are, trying to gather what's coming in front of them. And so, but they're not really shaped. There's a little bit of shape that helps us to hear what's coming from above us, but it's not nearly as strong as what tells us that something's coming from behind us.
I don't think in the evolution.
Yeah, fight or flight.
Yeah, I don't think in the evolutionary DNA of humanity we ever had to deal with many attacks from above in that
Birds
sense.
Of prey, swooping down, pterodactyls picking us up.
Yeah, that's gonna be the intro now.
You're listening to the GWNL-Podcast. Guys with no lives talking about audio.
Hello and welcome to episode 17 of GWNL-Podcast. We're back against popular demand. They tried to hire us to do other jobs, but we quit those day jobs so that we could come back and do this podcast tonight here. No, we've just been busy. People have been changing places and stuff, and it's summer, so busy season for all of us, even if you're just selling stuff. I am Joe.
Call me out.
Maybe.
I'm Ben.
And I'm Bryant.
And we are GWNL, the Guys with No Lives podcast, because we literally have nothing else to do besides audio, especially during the summers, which are not a break for audio. So today we're actually talking about stereo mic and multi-miking techniques, and we'll cover some really cool stuff today. But before we get into that, we're going to talk about the psychoacoustics, or the physical experience that we as people have when we experience sound and how we use microphones to kind of emulate or copy that experience. Who wants to take a first stab at that, psychoacoustics and directionality?
I can.
Or do you want me to do it?
I can take that. Let me get us started on it a little bit.
Okay.
So yeah, basically, we have two ears, right, for a reason.
I have three.
Oh, okay. I didn't know about that.
That's how live sound is. Anyways, keep going. Sorry.
Okay, so basically, the psychoacoustics of directionality, it's all about how we have our two ears, and the difference between what each ear picks up is what allows us to hear directionality. So there's a lot of people that have their hearing impaired in one ear, and they can't actually tell where a sound is coming from because they don't have the two ears to hear. And so there's basically three differences between what our two ears are hearing that helps us define how our brains figure out where the sound's coming from. So first of all, if a sound's coming from over here, it's going to be louder in this ear and softer in this ear. So there's a level difference. And then second, there's a time difference because it's going to get to this ear first and it's going to travel around my head and get to this ear a little later, like a fraction of a millisecond later. I mean, it's about a millisecond to travel around your head, just a little under that. And then the third one is what's called HRTF, or head-related transfer function, and it's a filtering that happens where as the sound travels around your head or travels around your outer ear, it's going to change the sound a little bit. It's going to filter out some of the frequencies. And so your brain can tell, this one is full frequency. This one has been filtered. And so that also tells us it's on this side of our head. So those three things are the way that we can hear directionality. And so all of these stereo microphone techniques will use some combination of one, two, or three of those things.
Yeah. So first up is the classic, the OG. I don't know if it's actually the classic anyways. It's the space pair. We have just basically two mics, straightforward, and they're spaced by how far is the space? There's a specific amount. I know the others are more specific.
It's basically from a foot to 10 feet is space pair.
Yeah.
Which is funny to me because that kind of violates the 3-to-1 rule to some extent with it, when you have it super wide, but it still works. It's still a space
That's
pair.
the thing. The 3-to-1 rule is if you're not doing one of these coincidental pairs. So these are called coincidental pairs because it's all about how the two interact with each other. But yeah, the space pair does kind of stretch that, and it is the most unrealistic sounding of them all because
you get the widest sound.
Because our ears are not 10 feet apart, right?
Yeah. So doing a space pair on a piano sounds really cool but it may not make the piano sound natural because you'll have one mic that favors the low strings over the high strings. And so if you pan that how people normally do, which is low strings on the left, high strings on the right, as somebody plays, like if they go up in pitch, you'll hear that in the
go from left to right.
In the panning, go from left to right. And so it can be a little bit disorienting to hear that, but also it can be a really cool effect.
Yeah,
you can also pair it with close miking to kind of manage some of that weird disorientation.
But it's like we've become accustomed to that with the piano. And it's not like we listen to piano by putting our heads by the strings. Like
I do that all the time. I don't know any problems, Ben.
Yeah.
It's the best way to hear a piano. Come on.
Yeah, I think the best description, the best like application for spaced pair, maybe it's not the best application all the time, but I really like spaced pair like for overheads on drums to get like a nice wide stereo image of the whole kit. Mm-hmm. But also you gotta watch out for phase, especially with the kick and the snare, because you want those to be the center of your image, and so you want to make sure that those are both equidistant to your overhead mics.
Yeah, and I think in general, going along with that, I think for me, space pair is more about two things. Number one is making something sound larger than life, because it's like it's bigger than the distance between our ears, so it makes things sound bigger. And number two is covering a large area of sound and instruments. So like on a drum kit, you're covering all these instruments. They're really different instruments, right? All the cymbals and all the tom-toms, which the old guys call them. The old engineers call them tom-toms. And then like a stereo guitar. Like you want to cover the body of the guitar and then the fretboard of the guitar. And there's a lot of things. And a piano, you're covering the low end of the piano and the high end of the piano. And so that's where stereo pair is really good, where you're covering like maybe a single source, but there's like different aspects of that source.
That makes sense, yeah.
Or I think a stereo pair is also really good, picking up kind of like a quartet. If you're wanting to get like that larger than life sound, there may be other better options for that, but I like it with a quartet or like an orchestra. And we'll talk about some other ones that may be better application. But in my experience, I really liked space pair on those.
Yeah. And sometimes, like on orchestra, especially if the space pair gets too far apart, it sounds really unnatural.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, there is one.
It comes back to that phasing issue we were talking about.
Yeah.
But,
and that's the benefit of most of these, is they're actually designed so that the phasing matches the phasing that happens in real life with that step 2, that time difference that we talked about.
So kind of moving on, I actually have fallen in love with using XY, which is the next one on our list of miking techniques for my drum set. For the reason, so Bryant was talking about how space pair can work really well as long as the mics are placed equidistant from the snare, so that you don't have weird phasing with the snare's sound image, right? Well, XY kind of gets rid of that problem, because when you do XY, you have one capsule that's over the other capsule, and they're kind of pointed like this, and the tips are pointed so that the polar pattern is going one way and then the other way, and that kind of builds your stereo pattern. Technically, it's like left is right and right is left in theory, but
because of where they're
whatever.
aiming, it looks kind of
because of where they're aiming.
Backwards.
Right, but it works. Now, the reason why I like it for my drum set and why I like to use that now rather than where I used to use spaced pairs for drum set is because now I don't have to worry about the phasing for my snare, because both of those capsules are in the same geophysical spot in relation. Yeah, it's a live sound technical term. No, but if they're in the same spot, so like phasing of the snare is not as big of an issue between my spaced pair, and I don't have to worry about equidistant placement for that. And in theory, I can treat it kind of like a mono overhead because it's literally in the same spot, but it's still giving me a stereo image of the drum set across the whole spread of instruments there. And I've really come to like it now. So
especially for live sound where you're running most things in mono, that's really awesome to have that. And that I realized I should have said like which. So for XY, it's only that level difference. There's no time difference because the diaphragms of the mics are in the same spot, so they're receiving their signal at the same time. But they are like, it's louder the stuff that's on the left is louder in the left microphone, and the stuff that's on the right is louder in the right microphone. Whereas space pair, because they're away from each other, you're going to get stuff getting to one mic before the other, so you have both level difference and time difference, and that's why you have the phase issues. So I think it's really important to point out which techniques use which of those three psychoacoustic things. So
that we can kind of perceive it.
Yeah, space pair is time and level. XY is just level.
Level.
Yeah.
And
then
XY is really common. That's what's in like the recorders and stuff you see.
Well,
all
you'll
the
see
time.
them on like Zooms, like the Zoom H4n, SPN, like a lot of those like Zoom
those
recorders.
handheld recorders. Yeah. Very, very common for those. The next miking technique is bloom line. Basically, it's similar to an XY pair, but instead of using two cardioid mics, you are using two figure of 8 mics. Coincidentally.
That's cute.
Pun intended. The bloom line. It is named after a person. The guy, Mr. Bloomline.
What a self-centered. I'm just kidding.
But it's this one's kind of funny. It works the same way as XY, like we said, where it's just level difference, no time, but you're getting the back of the mic too. And the cool thing about this, what's kind of weird, is if you surround people around the mic, it's like the people on, like you have your audience in the front, and there's left and right, but then the person back here is still coming through the left, and the thing back here is coming through the right. Yeah. So it can be kind of weird, but it's really nice if you're only capturing something in the front, and then you get the reverb coming from the back. It's really cool.
I was gonna say, like, I could see, like, you would talk to me about using omnidirectional capsules in treated environments, like in studios and stuff like that, and how that sounds better. And a lot of professional studios will do omni rather than cardioid pattern, so that it doesn't sound as I can't remember the word, but like condensed or like
you get less proximity effect.
Yeah, no proximity.
Yes, and like I kind of wonder if it's the same thing with like the bloom line, where it's not really, because you're doing 2 figure 8s in an X pattern. But I could imagine that, like you were talking with like the room sound that you're getting, as well as like what's in front of like from the ensemble, and then what would be from the room in like a concert hall.
It does kind of create a wider omni. It's like if you use it like as an omni, like room mic, it's like a wider omni. It's
kind of cool.
It's like a really common application for like bloom line I've seen is to like get a stereo mic to piano. And part of that is because the one side you're capturing the strings, and then on the other side you're capturing the reflection off of the lid of the piano if you have the the grand piano's lid opened up, and so you get that like natural reverb from it.
And some of the room too would come in.
Yeah. And then something else that I've seen Bloomline used as is like AEA has a stereo mic, and AEA makes ribbon mics. Yeah, stereo ribbon mic. I think it's the R88. And they actually did a series where they basically were miking a whole group with just that one mic. And so they were trying to get away with like one mic. Technically it's it's a stereo mic, so it's still two inputs, but they would have the vocalist right front and center to have that up that way, and then anything else, if they wanted it to be panned, they just basically do the panning physically in the room. Yeah, physically.
Yeah.
So it's really, really cool, but you get like a really natural sound within the room with that kind of a thing if you're trying to get that live type feel.
Yeah. And the reverb that's going to come in the back of the mic, it's not going to make any difference that the left and right are kind of swapped, The reverb's diffuse enough that's not like, it's like, the reverb sounds like it's opposite, You're like, no, you're not going to be able to.
No. Yeah, it's too mushy at that point. It's been the clarity is too gone.
Yeah. But Bloomline's really cool. It is most commonly done with ribbon mics, and there are like some ribbon mics that are built like that. But it can be done with any figure of 8 mics, and they should be, all the ones we've talked about so far should be a matched pair. They should be the same kind of mic.
Speaking of which, have we covered, so like XY, Bloomline, what would you say are the effects, the psychoacoustic effects that Bloomline
it's just the one, just like XY. It's just
Okay.
the level difference,
Okay.
but not time. Because and that's the nice thing about the ones that are
they're
built
there.
together is it's really, the diaphragms are really close to each other, and so they're
So
more.
you really don't have to worry about any sort of phasing
Yeah.
on those.
So
Yeah.
next up is a classic from Radio France. It is the Office de Radiodiffusion Télévision Française,
Yeah. So
or the
this,
ORTF.
This one's fun with the name.
Brian's gonna laugh at me because I can't speak French at all, and he actually can.
So-
He's like, "This is embarrassing."
So, we had this last semester, I was teaching this, and it was really funny because I told them about how it's like French basically for operators of radio and television foundation. That's basically what and so then I said, but in English, we would call it the Foundation of Radio and Television Operators, which is FARDO. And so so all the students started calling it the FARDO technique. So like,
Oh,
we
yeah.
should try FARDO, and that's
You mean
it
ORTF?
officially became FARDO, FRTO. So it is now FARDO instead of ORTF. In English, it's FARDO. If we translate ORTF to English, it becomes FARDO.
Fardo.
The Foundation of
Interesting.
Radio and Television.
I'll stick with the
Operators.
ORTF. Thank you.
Yeah.
I've taught this like many, many years, and that's the first time that we came up with FARDO by saying that, and I was just like, and
That's
then
so
the
great.
students just couldn't let it go. So every time we did a lab about it and stuff, they're like, "Oh, we should try the FARDO." Yeah,
I mean, at least it's getting them to try it.
and
so-
on the
Yeah.
test, they're like, "Oh, can I say FARDO on there? Or do I have to say?" I'm like, "I'll accept FARDO." You got the letters.
All right, Brian, how would you
Yeah.
actually say ORTF? Like, say you actually can
Yeah,
pretend.
because
Let
this
me-
guy
let me-
speaks French.
I have to actually.
sadly,
look it
there are
up.
no. Like,
Yeah, if you look it up
Filipino
on
engineers.
Wikipedia, it will pop right
Yeah.
up.
Yeah, it's
Office de Radiodiffusion.
Office de Radiodiffusion Télévision Française.
Yeah, see, someone can actually speak it properly. Gosh
Yeah,
dang,
what he
I'm an
said.
idiot.
Oh, is
Yeah.
the F for French? France?
Yeah, so Française,
Oh,
is
France,
French,
okay.
and it's since télévision is feminine, Française is feminine.
Okay.
So instead of français, it's française.
But the O is basically, it's like radio and television operators, right? Of
It's
France.
Office Day, so Office of
Is it
Radio
Office?
Diffusion.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
office.
Office of
Okay.
Radio
Yeah,
Diffusion.
So-
French radio and television office.
See? It's still FARDO. French Radio and Television Office.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's actually talk about
Yeah.
how to do ORTF now that we've talked about the history of how
Okay.
not to say the name right. ORTF
Yeah.
is kind of like a mix between Space Parent XY in some regards. What happens is you have two microphones, basically like this. They're at a 110-degree angle, and they are spaced. I think the capsules are 17 centimeters capsule to capsule.
Yeah,
And
which
for the-
is,
I don't
those
know what
po-
that is in inches.
For those podcast listeners that can't see that, 110-degree angles angled out, so the capsules are pointing away from
pointing
each
away
other.
from each other, and it's mainly designed to be like your ears, so they're like the same distance, similar distance to where your ears are apart from each other. It's like putting two microphone capsules where your ears are, so they're sort of facing forward, but they're kind of facing out too, which is the 110. So if they were like 180, they'd just be facing completely out, but they're kind of forward.
Yeah, like instead of them facing like this, they're like this.
Yeah.
If you can see it on the YouTubes.
And they really equate well to headphones, and they equate to speakers really well. But this is one of the, so far, actually of the four we've talked about so far, this is the most natural sounding one so far.
Sometimes it's a little boring how natural it sounds. I'm gonna be real.
Yeah, and like the XY often sounds really narrow to me, like really mono. So like
Yeah.
I've done a lot of tests with students and stuff, and in like setting up and recording concerts and everything. And to me, the ORTF like usually wins, especially for like an orchestra, especially because they're pointed out wide. If you have a really big orchestra and you're like putting this ORTF array like just behind the conductor or just over their head, it really picks up the orchestra like it's what the
Conductor's hearing.
conductor's hearing. Exactly.
Yeah.
I was gonna say when we did it at the school we were at when I was a student of yours, we ended up going with we had the 15-foot tall boom stand, the straight stand, and we ended up going back into like the second or third row in the concert hall and then putting it, I think, most of the way up. I remember marking it. I have marks on the thing.
Yeah, and it
Well, I
was
should
interesting
have.
because we did experiments, and as you get further away, you get more. It's the balance between the direct and the wet,
Yeah.
or the dry.
But
and
we
the
had
wet.
a good sound. We have a great sounding acoustic space, and I
Yeah.
felt like that space actually lended well to those ensembles, those more acoustic style.
So if you get too
ensembles.
close, like over the director's head, was like
Right.
too dry sounding. It was too direct. But I think it was like it ended up being like if we went to the second or third row, it was like too wet. It was like right on the first row.
yeah,
And there's a good there's an aisle between the stage and the first row. So there's some space for it. So it's a good 8 feet behind the conductor, 8 or 10 feet.
yeah, and it works because we had a really good sounding hall with space. But I really did. I actually do use ORTF if I have to use a type of XY, a spaced pair or whatever.
And the interesting thing I've found about this is when you get a smaller ensemble, like especially when I've gone from recording orchestra with ORTF, then you try to record a solo vocalist with a piano and bringing that in more narrow to become this 6 or 7 inch apart spaced pair actually ends up sounding better because you have more of a centered sort of thing. So if it is a soloist like that, I'll usually point them more straight ahead, so they're 0 or 10 degrees instead of 110 degrees.
Yeah.
But if it's
that makes
this
sense.
big ensemble, that 110 degrees works really well. But it still sounds good with a centered thing when they're pointing out, which is weird because you would think, oh, the mics are pointing away from it, but our ears are pointing away to the sides, but we hear the people right in front of us really well.
Yeah, and we get a little bit of forward. I almost kind of feel like ORTF sounds natural because you have a little bit of that forward because the shape of our ear and how the ear picks up sound, though it is still more side like that 180 rather than the directly
The 110.
I don't know.
Yeah, because
Well,
they're cupped to catch the sound.
And so our ears are really good at hearing sound around us because of the way the shape that they are. And so just kind of like the filtering thing, something from behind you is filtered by your ear.
Yeah. So speaking of psychoacoustics, this does use two. It uses time difference and level difference. And because that time difference, the phase issue that's going to happen is the same phase issue that would happen with our heads, because it's the same distance as our ears, it sounds very natural, that phase issue. It sounds like the natural phase difference that we hear in real life.
It more closely matches, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so ORTF, that's cool. Now we have a fun one that's terrifying to many people, but it's actually really, really cool. Mid-side.
So this is dumbed down to MS, but stands for mid-side, and there's a middle microphone that's a cardioid that's facing forward. And then there's the side microphone, which is a figure 8 that faces the sides. And they're the same thing. They look kind of the same as a Bloom line, where they're a 90-degree angle from each other. But you don't just take the mid and put it to the left and the side and put it to the right, because the mid is really the center, and the side, the figure 8, is the sides. So it does this encoding and decoding process, this is the thing that scares people.
Extremely complicated, and we don't have the time to go into it in this podcast.
It's so funny because I've dealt with people that just stay away from it because they think it's super complex, and you're just like, it's actually really simple.
Yeah, the decoding process is super easy for the side. All you do is you just duplicate the track in post-production, and then you invert the phase, and then you pan one to the left, and then the inverted one to the right.
So he's saying you duplicate the figure of 8 track and then
Yeah.
hard pan the duplication. So one is to the left, one is to the right, and then you phase rotate one of them. And then the mid stays normal in the center, and then the sides have that thing going down with him.
And
Sorry,
essentially,
I
if the mid's in the
clarified
center, it's still sending the same equal amount to both of those sides, And so you would think if you just listen to that figure of 8, panned hard left and right and flip phase, it would sound all weird and out of phase.
hollow.
Yeah, but having that mid in there, that cardioid that's at the same space as it, fixes that and makes it not sound phasey.
like, I don't know if anybody has done this, but I have literally done this on like line arrays on accident. So I accidentally flipped the phase in the middle, like in like a middle block of like one of the lines, and like I didn't realize it, and we were testing them in a line. Thankfully, it was in the shop, and so I flipped the phase, and I didn't realize. I'm like, man, this doesn't sound right. And like my boss comes by, and he's like, yeah, you dingus. You flipped the phase. And I was like, how did I do that? And he's like, did you wire them wrong? Did you put the positive on the negative and the negative on the positive? Anyways, so I did that, and that hollow sound is like now how I like identify phase rotation. And it's that lesson has like served me so much more better, because like I'm like, oh yeah, flip the phase, duh. And like, but that kind of hollow sound actually, so like I was talking about this before the podcast, and I don't know if Jake's gonna take that or this or whatever, but what's cool about this, and I had this like whole epiphany, like come to Jesus moment, where I realized that because you flip the phase on things that are panned hard left and right, it's going to hollow out the middle frequencies of that signal, from what I've heard a lot of times when I've listened to actual phase rotated stuff that's like compared to a traditional signal. Now, the reason that midside works really well is because you have this middle microphone to fill in those frequencies that you would have essentially been canceling out from the phase rotated left and right. So though you would have that hollowness in a stereo setting between the left and the right duplications, you have that middle frequency to kind of fill in those harmonic gaps, if you will. And that's why it's really cool, and it works really well. And that's why I like really, now I'm like super into like mid-side now, because it's like a really cool thing, because it works with those things. And depending on how much volume, like Ben was saying, you turn up that middle frequency, you can make it seem wider or more, or centered more, based off of that middle frequency and how much presence you get from that
middle microphone. Yeah.
Yeah.
So the cool thing is this is using both time and level difference, and so it's got the time difference of the phasiness of the left and right, and like Joe was saying, the less of the middle mic, you get more of that phasiness happening, and so it sounds wider. And the more that you put of the middle cardioid mic, there's less of the phasiness, and so it sounds more centered. So,
right.
But it's really easy. Cool. There's actually encoders on a lot of preamps, like 2-channel preamps, so you can monitor with the MS, so you can hear it in stereo. Because when you're trying to monitor it, it's like the mid is like really hot, and the side is like really soft, because you're picking up the sides, you know. Right. And so it's really kind of tough to check it at times. And I've had people that like, I'm like, okay, I teach them how to do mid-side, and then they go and record, and then they come back and it sounds really mono, and I'm like, well, you actually flipped your side as the middle and the and the mid, so that's you threw the cardioid out of phase, you know. And so
you threw the mid out of phase, not the side. That's hilarious.
The guy really did it. He did it through a pre that had a button to do that, and so it was kind of like, I was like, oh shoot, it's stuck this way, and then I realized later, I'm like, oh, I can just run it through a decoder and then flip it around and run it back through an encoder and make it work. But anyways, yeah, that's what scares people of it. But the cool thing is this gets used for a lot of things. One of the most common things is sound effects. So like they have those sound effect blimps. Sometimes they'll have XYs in them and stuff, but a lot of times they'll have an MS array, and they'll have 2 pencil condensers. Oh. And a lot of times the field recorders will have an MS encoder on it, so that, and then they'll have an adjustment level, so they like turn up the gain of the mid so that it's more centered. But it's great for sound effects, because a lot of sound effects you need a very strong center, but having a stereo aspect of it too gives it more depth. So
yeah. Huh, that's awesome. Cool. Midside's really neat. You should use it. Try it out. Especially if you're in the studio. It's really neat.
And it's also, the whole midside encoding and decoding is what can be used to adjust the center versus the sides of a mix too in mastering. So,
well, we have Decatree, and then just the spatial
move on
stuff.
to Decatree then.
Yeah, Decatree's cool.
Yeah.
If you're into that sort of thing.
If you're into trees.
I really like trees.
Oh my gosh.
So what they do is they grow a fir tree, a Douglas fir, in the studio. You see,
by the orchestra.
Studio.
Yeah.
buys the orchestra. You see, this is why Decatree is such a coveted microphone technique. You have to spend the 20 or so years growing the tree, and then once you've grown the tree, you have to adjust the branches and like.
You have to like
Decatree?
trim the tree as it grows, so it just has 3 branches, right?
What the Decatree technique is, it's a 3 mic technique. You've got two mics, I believe, is it like 6 to 10 feet apart?
Yeah, usually 10, but they can be.
And they're like your far mics, and you've got one mic in front of that's exactly in the middle. That's usually
half the distance forward.
Yeah.
So if they're 10 feet apart, there's like a center
5 foot
point.
forward.
Yeah, the center point of the trunk of the tree, right?
I'm seeing it 2 meters left to right with 1.5 meters front to back is what I'm seeing.
Oh yeah.
So that's meters, not feet.
Well, yeah,
Right?
I mean,
but that's not half though.
yeah, it's
half the
usually
distance forward.
My understanding was that it's 10 feet from left to right, and then 5 feet to the front one.
I've never done this, so whatever.
I have, and that's what I've done. So, but I think there's variations of it, but something around that. But that would make sense. Having a little, varying that a little bit could make a little bit of a difference. But then it gets panned left, center, right, and usually they're Omni microphones too. And traditionally, they're U47s in Omni.
Oh.
Huh.
And that
explains why they use like TLM, like TLMs and stuff like that.
Yeah, the TLMs are like the newer version of the
U47.
Yeah.
I even see some with like so they have like the center, right? But they'll even have like another, like, I guess, shotgun mic pointed out of it. That's weird.
Yeah, there's lots of variations, and it is. Yeah. It kind of was a technique that was designed. It's best for orchestra, and so
that makes sense.
Decca Records did it for recording orchestra, and they developed it. So that's why it's called the Decatree, and it looks like this big tree because it's like 20 feet in the air too.
Yeah,
and so
it's a big array.
Yeah. But it's great for orchestra, and that's what still most of the orchestra recordings you hear in movies and stuff are recorded with the Decatree. And in movies, it's great because you've got left, center, right in your surround sound, and so you just put those mics to left, center, right. So
yeah,
nice. But I've done it recording. I did it once recording a choir. It was really cool, even though we mixed it in stereo. But
lame. Stereo's so boring. Speaking of how boring stereo is. Oh, wait, before we get to that Decatree, time and level, my guess is?
Yeah, so that one's time and level, yeah. Because it's kind of like a space pair. It's kind of an advanced space pair because it has that center. Because then you can get the width of like the 10 feet apart or 6 feet apart, but then have some like, because you have some stereo center, yeah. Because like with the space pair, once you get too wide, it starts to sound kind of hollow in the middle. Not phasey hollow, but like empty.
No.
So in a sense, it's kind of like combining spaced pair and like a mid mic.
Yeah, like almost like the MS kind of idea.
So. MS and Space Pair had a child, and it was
Decatree.
And it was Decca Records that became Decatree. All right, so spatial audio. So now I'm kind of lumping these in because we have like an episode dedicated to spatial audio and the capture and reproduction of those things. But we're talking about essentially 3 concepts, which is binaural. There's also ambisonic microphones, and then 360-degree audio, and how those things are all kind of interrelated, talking about those 3 psychoacoustic factors.
So binaural comes first because it really is connected to these, but then...
Right. What is it? What's the Neumann's head mic? I can't remember the model name.
Literally, it's like a mannequin face.
Yeah, so
it's like a head.
So yeah,
they just
binaural,
put like rubber ears on it. Like,
it's basically like ORTF, but you putting it in a mannequin head, so you actually get that third thing, the filtering, because there's actually
you're mimicking
ears
the ear.
You're
mimicking that. You're mimicking the. Some of them actually are like well designed for like mimicking the actual earlobe and ear canal, as well. But I actually have been watching a lot of videos on this from like headphone tester people. It's kind of an average of a lot of people's ear canals and ear shapes is what they use to kind of design those binaural microphones. Yeah. But some of them are used. I think most of the applications I know of for a lot of those is more like headphone testing and like testing the human experience, sort of.
Yeah.
But even that's not a perfect analog for how everyone's going to experience sound.
Yeah, and that's the problem with them. So there's some cool, like when it was first developed, this guy did a bunch of recordings and they're really famous and they're online and you can hear like this stuff dancing around you and stuff.
Cool.
But it's really cool for headphones, but it's really not that great on speakers. And so it's like really real, like it's super realistic with headphones. So especially if you listen to some of these binaural recordings out there, it's like someone's dancing around. If you like
Binaural.
The virtual haircut. That's a pretty cool one.
yeah, yeah, that's
and that
true.
beget ASMR.
Yeah, yeah, I know it really is kind of.
Okay.
So
moving
binaural
on
would be
from-
great for.
Yeah. Moving on from binaural, you got the ambisonic mic, which is usually it's four capsules. They're all pointed in different directions. So it's picking up audio from that one single point that are, it's basically all four capsules are essentially in phase since they're so close to each other. But it allows you to get that like 360 feel in a way.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the cool thing about ambisonic, and it gets to the decoding and encoding sort of thing, because they figured out that by adding or subtracting various amounts of those mics from each other, you can kind of make your array like a cardioid that's facing one direction and it's rejecting the things behind it, or make it a figure of eight in different directions. And they have like more than 4 mics on. There's 6 mics ones. There's
an 8 mic one.
I've heard a 15 mic.
That's
one.
insane.
The 15 mic one is a USB mic because you'd have to have a 15 channel interface to connect it to. And the cool thing about that one, they had software with it that you could basically like put it in the center of an ensemble and then say, move it around and be like, oh, there's the upright bass. Now I can mix the upright bass and then move it around and find the drum kit. Yeah.
So I have been like watching a lot of other like live sound engineers, and I've recently discovered Dave Rat, and I'm not name dropping because I know the guy. I don't know anything about him, but his YouTube channel is really cool, and he actually talks about how the experience that most concert goers experience sound from is a horizontal experience and not a vertical experience. Because he specifically talks about the weaknesses of line arrays in this specific video, where he talks about how you do get weird filtering vertically, but because you as a concert goer are not experiencing the concert vertically, you're only experiencing sound from a horizontal and rotational plane. In that, it doesn't matter that that's a weakness of line arrays, that you're going to get weird comb filtering in between each box and at the points where they're going to be spread out. And so like kind of applying it to these kinds of things, most of this 360 audio and spatial audio is actually horizontally based and rotationally based, because we're not even thinking, like if we think of spatial audio, because like we think of 360 degree audio, we're talking about degrees, but we're not talking about verticality in that kind of thing, which is a whole nother way of even perceiving audio.
Well, there's
for the experience.
There's debate on whether or not like stuff like Atmos is even like necessary, because the verticality in audio, like do we perceive that verticality or do we not? And so there's debate about whether or not those like additional 4 channels, because in a Dolby Atmos setup you're looking at 7.2.4.
Well, it's variable. But yeah.
But yeah, variable, but minimum specs of that.
Yeah. Minimum,
And so that 4 vertical channels, like can you hear that additional? Can you hear that like that height, those 4 channels that are up above, or are you hearing the horizontalness from that?
Yeah.
Which is like kind of like the point, because like if you think about the like as for me, and like when I think about a concert goer's experience, they're not really like, especially when you think about a concert person there, they're not really listening to the music if they're getting up to get a drink. They might be, but they're not engaging with the music in the same sense as if they're like in the concert, in those seats, participating. You know what I'm saying?
Well, even within that, if you think of like where speakers are placed at a concert, they're up high, but we don't perceive it as sound coming up from clear up high. We're seeing the band and we're perceiving the sound coming to us just from that stage. Yeah, directly.
Now, I mean, if when you look at line arrays, the design of them is designed to essentially manage that height, and it doesn't, because they're still calculating the distance from the top box and the small and the lowest box and the angles of those things, so that it's throwing it across like an even dispersal pattern. The only weird thing is you generally want like a little bit of a upness there to kind of manage some of that, because it gets a little wonky, and you still get weird comb filtering between boxes, but it's negligible because it's that vertical versus horizontal experience of it.
Yeah, and it's got to be up high so that it can reach over all the front
and so you're not
heads.
blowing the heads off of the first few rows.
But yeah, it's like this goes back to the psychoacoustics concept.
Yeah.
That filtering, that third thing, the filtering, our ears, part of that filtering helps us to hear from what's behind us, because our ears are, trying to gather what's coming in front of them. And so, but they're not really shaped. There's a little bit of shape that helps us to hear what's coming from above us, but it's not nearly as strong as what tells us that something's coming from behind us.
I don't think in the evolution.
Yeah, fight or flight.
Yeah, I don't think in the evolutionary DNA of humanity we ever had to deal with many attacks from above in that
Birds
sense.
of prey.
Yeah, right.
Swooping down. Pterodactyls picking us up.
Yeah, that's going to be the intro now. But spatial sound is really cool in the sense of like that kind of stuff. But like even then, there are different ways. Like that's something that crossed my mind as you were explaining like the issues with Dolby Atmos and whether it is or isn't perceptible. I'm like, how would you even like in headphones or something like that? How would you even give the perception of going up?
It's that same thing. It's that third one. It's the filtering. And it is.
I guess, yeah.
It is, because it's got to go over the top of your ear, and your head shape is different from vertical. And so it's all about that. It's just the subtle differences in that filtering, which that really leads us to this 360 audio.
Right.
So the whole thing about this is like if you're like in an interactive video game or a 3D.
Yeah, in a video game.
VR.
I know a lot of
VR,
games that
that's
have
the word
good.
I'm looking for. If you're VR and you move your head, yes, the image changes, but you want the sound to change. So if you're looking forward and there's a machine gun going to your right and there's a baby crying to your left, if you turn your head to the left, now the baby crying is supposed to be centered and the machine gun is like going to be behind you. Right. And so you would think, and that's what, whenever I explain the ambisonics and stuff, everybody's thinking, oh, well, that's how they do the VR audio. And it's like, no, they can't, because they would have to create every circumstance and move the mic array around.
Like it would have to adjust for the adjustments that you're making with your head.
It'd be like an infinite amount of like recordings to trigger, But what they do is they use those three things, the time difference, level difference, and filtering, the head relay transfer function, and they have like individual recorded elements, and as you move your head around, it's saying, oh, that baby crying was off to the left, and so it was louder in your left ear and softer in the right, and earlier to the left and later to the right, and full signal to the left and slightly filtered in the right. Now once you turn your head, now all of a sudden it changes the mix of that sound effect and says, okay, now it's equal in both ears, so it's going to sound centered. It's going to be filtered the same in both ears, and it's same level and same time difference in both ears. So now it sounds like it's in the center. And so you move your head again, and the mix of all those elements change dynamically to be that 360 sound.
Trying to do that like in an analog method is almost more complicated than just doing digital sampling and manipulating the samples. Like it's almost easier to do it in a video game than trying. Like I was talking about this before, where I was talking with a buddy of mine in audio, and we were talking about how cool it would be to record as if you were a musician in an orchestra, but like the technical wizardry to make that happen is kind of like crazy when you think about it, because like what you were just talking about with 360 degree audio, if you were to turn your head in that VR situation, now the sound is going to change in a way that is like majorly different than a single microphone would interpret. And And then, like, imagine if you were to walk around in VR in that same space, essentially where an orchestra is performing, and like, how would they capture that? Like, there's like infinite, like, as you increase the complexity of like the spatial audio, that's what you do. You're like, as you walk around, you're increasing the complexity of those things. And I know because I've read like textbooks specifically discussing the like billions of like refractions that occur and reflections that occur within a single auditory space, and they talk about calculating that and trying to manipulate that with like first reflections, and then we're talking about spatial stuff like reverberations and delays and all of these other myriad things that are going to be happening, and capturing it with a microphone only gets you so close. And then like it's so much easier to just build samples and then building a 3-dimensional audio within a digital environment than trying to capture it in the analog space.
Yeah.
Because of all of these factors that just keep piling up, and then how do you overcome this, just for somebody to walk to one side of an ensemble to another, to hear that as if they were in that space. Just go learn how to play the violin and join an orchestra. Like it'd be
walk
easier.
around. We had that happen at one of our concerts where this person was supposed to take pictures, and they just started walking up on the stage, taking pictures and like getting in the way. And you're like, you're supposed to be discreet. And yes, you want to get good pictures, but it's also a performance, and we don't want the audience to be distracted by the photographer. But yeah,
some dude walk up next to the conductor, snap.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what they were doing. And the conductor was just like, get out of here. So anyways, yeah, that's 360 audio. So, I mean, we can go, there's a lot more to talk about with that. And that's a lot of the future of audio. And that's what we will have
audio.
A future podcast talking more about that.
It has been a wonderful night. It's glad to be back for GWNL. I am Joe. We have
Ben.
I'm pointing to somebody.
Bryant.
And we are GWNL. Mix good.
Mix good.
Just say it.
Mix good.
Mix good.
We're GWNL Podcast.
Good.
Mix good.